Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on Pub Stomp MTG. So with this video, I'm going to go over Beluna Grandsquall. So for 3 mana in green, blue, and red, we have a legendary creature, Giant Noble. She does have trample and permanent spells you cast that have an adventure cost 1 less to cast, and on top of that she does have the adventure ability with Seek Thrills costing 2 green, blue, and a red. It's an instant adventure, mill 7 cards, then put all cards that have adventure from among the mill cards into your hand. So my overall consensus, this is a pretty cool commander in my opinion. Just having that adventure side, casting it from the command zone is pretty cool, and then it'll go on an adventure so that you can cast it for its permanent side. So it's pretty neat. I do like the idea of having an adventure commander. Also, we did have Kellen the Fey-Blooded. I did make a deck tag on him. If you want to go check that out, I'll post the link above here. This also does beg the question, is this now the best adventure commander, or is it Gorion Wise Mentor? I'm kind of deciding back and forth. They cost the same amount of mana. However, she does have a little bit more versatility, getting more adventures into your hand, and on top of that, reducing them. With Gorion, you have a Lucky Clover effect, doubling up your adventures. So for me, I do like Beluna Grandsquall just a little better. I mean, I feel like doubling up adventures is pretty powerful. However, Beluna just gives you so much value. So let's take a trip with this commander. What are we going to do in this deck? Of course, we're going to have as much adventure spells so that we could get that value out of her adventure ability. So for example, I have a lot of interactive pieces like Hornlocked Whale, Sword Coast Serpent, and Brazen Borrow. These all have that ability just for 2 mana, just to return a creature to their hand. Or with Brazen Borrower, you could return an online permanent an opponent controls to their hand. So these are great versatility options, mainly because when I played Standard a long time ago with adventures with the first Throne of Eldraine, I felt like it was a great tempo piece so that you could essentially cast the adventure at instant speed, then later on cast the creature spell. So honestly, adventures was very broken in Standard in the first place. Plus, it will give you the versatility with Hornlocked Whale and also Brazen Borrow so that you can cast them at flash speed. I know Hornlocked Whale will enter the battlefield tapped, but that's okay because if you want to hold up mana for... So again, I do like these for their bounce effect. On top of that, having a big body with Hornlocked Whale and Sword Coast Serpent. But on top of that, they're just great pieces overall. Other cards I wanted to suggest for you is the Virtue Cycle with Virtue of Courage, Virtue of Knowledge, and Virtue of Strength. The main reason why I wanted to point these out is the fact that they do have a great adventure side. Virtue of Courage essentially being a great removal piece, possibly for 1 mana with our commander, and also we could get some card advantage. I mean, we're going to get them from Exile, but that's okay because we are playing from an Exile theme, so this is going to be very good in the deck. Virtue of Knowledge is just going to double up the ETBs and also copy activated or trigger abilities we control. And with Virtue of Strength, it's essentially a mana tripler, which is quite insane. And on top of that, with the 1 mana spell, return target creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. So great versatility overall with these 3 cards specifically. They have a lot of great uses in the deck as we want to cast a lot of different spells. These are great options overall. I did also want to talk about this little guy with Bramble Familiar. It looks very cute, and on top of that, it's a great mana dork for 2 mana. And on top of that, if you want to discard a card, return it to your hand, you could easily do so that you could cast its adventure side. For 7 mana, for sorcery speed, you mill 7 cards, then put a creature enchantment or a land card from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. So this one is extremely versatile in the deck, mainly because you could cast it early on so that you could ramp into bigger spells, and then later in the game you could just discard a card so that you could get that big effect for 7 mana. So it's both great in the early game and also great in the late game. Let's also go on a quest with Questing Druid. For 2 mana, it has that ability whenever you cast a spell that's white, blue, black, or red, put a 1/1 counter on Questing Druid. So there's a lot of spells we are casting left and right, whether they're adventures or they're the actual creature themselves. So this is going to get huge pretty fast. And on top of that, it does have a great adventure side. Seek the Beast for 1 and a red. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until your next end step, you may play those cards. So this will give you semi-card advantage, and it will be a great beater, especially late in the game when you're casting more and more spells on the battlefield. I will discuss more adventure cards later on in the video. However, I do want to talk about some more cards that take advantage of adventures. Probably one of the best cards to do so is Lucky Clover. Whenever you cast an adventure, instant, or sorcery spell, you copy it. You may choose a new target for the copy. I will tell you what, this is quite insane in the deck, mainly because, say for example, you cast a Brazen Borrower so that you can bounce a permanent opponent controls. If you have Lucky Clover out on the battlefield, you could copy that spell so that you could bounce 2 permanents just for 2 mana. I feel like this is going to be the best card in the deck, if not one of the best cards in the deck, at least in my opinion. This did also get banned in Standard because adventures were taking over the format. Other synergies I do want to talk about is Edgewall Innkeeper and his Edgewall Inn. So Edgewall Innkeeper is a pretty great card draw outlet just for 1 green mana. Whenever you cast a creature spell that has an adventure, you draw a card. That's simple. You're just replacing that card that you just put on the battlefield that's a creature. Also, what I do like about Edgewall Inn is the fact that it essentially can fix you with mana, and on top of that, you can pay 3 and tap it by sacrificing a return target card that has an adventure from your graveyard to your hand. So both of these cards are pretty excellent in the deck by getting you some extra advantage, but I did also want to talk about Lozon Dragon's Legacy. For 5 mana, you have flying, and whenever you cast an adventure spell or a dragon spell, it deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target that isn't a commander. We do have a decent amount of dragons that we could deal damage with Lozon's ability. However, with the amount of adventure spells we're going to be casting, it's going to be quite ridiculous how much damage we're going to deal to opponents or their creatures. But if you want to reuse an adventure spell, you could use Sentinel of Lost Lore. So for 3 mana, when it enters the battlefield, you choose 1 or more. You return target card you own in exile that has an adventure to your hand. You put a target card you don't own in exile that has an adventure on the bottom of its owner's library, or you exile target player's graveyard. So I mainly like this for the first and also the last ability. Having that ability to reuse an adventure card is quite good, and on top of that, exiling a graveyard is pretty excellent, mainly because if somebody's playing a reanimator strategy, you could kind of hose them by using that ability. So I would say this has a very strong ETB, no question about it. So with that said, I did also want to talk about a little bit of a playing from exile theme. Taking advantage of those creatures coming from exile onto the battlefield is really good, so let's take advantage of that by using Mizzix's Replica Rider. I mainly like it for that ability. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, you may pay a blue or a red and a 1 mana. If you do, you copy that spell and you choose the new targets for the copy. If the copy is a permanent spell, it gains haste, and at the beginning of your next end step, sacrifice this permanent. So in most scenarios, you're going to be casting a lot of creatures with this side so that you can get double value if they do have an ETB and if they are played from exile. Other great play from exile effects would be cards like Wild Magic Sorcerer, where you could get Cascade off the first spell you cast from exile. On top of that, you do have Nashini. I'm not sure how to pronounce that correctly, but essentially when you cast a spell from exile, you copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. If it's a permanent spell, the copy gains haste, and at the beginning of the next end step, you sacrifice this permanent. So this is very similar to Mizzix, so that you could essentially get more value out of the creatures you put on the battlefield. And with Keeper of Secrets, we could essentially amplify the damage of our creatures that we cast from exile so that we could deal a lot of damage to our opponents. Another great play from exile effect is using Tlinkali Hunter. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. There's a lot of names that I can't pronounce correctly, but so for 7 mana, you do have trample. Once during each of your turns, you may pay 0 mana rather than paying the mana cost of a creature spell you cast from exile. And it also does have an adventure for 1 and a green. Exile target creature card from your graveyard. Until at the end of your next turn, you may cast that card. So we do have a lot of big creatures that have that adventure side that we do want to cast from exile. Having that ability of paying 0 rather than the mana cost is excellent in the deck, so I do love this card for that. I did also want to talk about a pretty neat theme that works really well in the deck, and that's using giants to our fullest advantage, because our commander is a giant, and there's a lot of giants that have that adventure cost, like Bone Crusher Giant, Beanstalk Giant, and also Stormkeld Vanguard. Bone Crusher Giant is excellent in the deck so that you can remove those little pesky creatures. With Beanstalk Giant, you have that ability to ramp early on, and with Stormkeld Vanguard, you can destroy a target artifact or enchantment. Unfortunately for a sorcery speed, but for 2 mana, that's pretty good overall. So the reason why I went with a giant theme in this deck is, of course, we do have a lot of giants that do have adventures on them. Also, I do feel like they're a very underutilized tribe in my opinion, so I do feel like giants could be a fun route to go with this deck. I did also want to include some other giants like Calamity Bearer and Surtland Flinger. You could double the damage of giants you control with Calamity Bearer, including your commander too, so it could be relevant if you want to go in for some commander damage. And with Surtland Flinger, one of my personal favorite cards in commander is Fling, because if you do have a big creature, you could swing in, and then on top of that, you could just sacrifice it so that you could deal more damage to your opponents. But with Surtland Flinger, it's pretty good because you don't have to just use giants. I mean, you can to double the damage to your opponents, but If you just want to sacrifice, like for example, a Sword Coast Serpent, you can just deal 6 damage to any target, so I feel like that's pretty good value overall. However, if we are milling a lot of cards with our commander, we could take advantage of that by using Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, and also Quakebringer. With Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, it has that escape ability so that you can return it from the graveyard to the battlefield. You could gain 3 life and draw a card whenever it enters the battlefield or you attack with it. So this is great advantage with Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, and also it was another card that was banned in Standard. There's a common theme in this deck. There's a lot of banned cards that were in Standard in this deck. I did also want to talk about Quakebringer. Say for example, you used your commander's ability to mill cards to put your adventure cards into your hand, and Quakebringer was milled into your graveyard. If you do have a giant on the battlefield, or if you do have your commander out on the battlefield, you'll be dealing 2 damage to each opponent at the beginning of your upkeep. So this is just amplifying the damage that you could do to your opponents so that you could kind of close out the game faster than you need to. Plus having your opponents can't gaining life is pretty good overall. With that said, I did also want to talk about 2 giants that are probably the best in the deck with Sage of the Beyond. So for 5 and 2 blue, it does have flying, and spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast, and it does have that foretell ability for 5 mana. So obviously in this deck, this is very good, mainly because, say for example, you have a Bone Crusher Giant on an adventure. Instead of 3 mana, it'll just cost 1 mana with Sage of the Beyond on the battlefield. Plus it's a giant too, so again, that's why I wanted to reemphasize giants could be a good strategy in this deck. So with that said, I do feel like the best giant in the deck is Cyclone Summoner, mainly because for 7 mana, it enters the battlefield. If you cast it from your hand, you return all permanents to their owner's hand except for giants, wizards, and lands. So there's a lot of things to like about this card. It's a Cyclonic Rift for your opponents. I feel like that's great by itself, but if you do have a lot of adventure cards on the battlefield, like either creatures or artifacts, you could just bounce them to your hand so that you could reuse their adventure sides again. So in my opinion, it's not really a downside when you're bouncing cards to your own hand and you're bouncing your opponent's cards to their hand. So I feel like this is going to be an incredible card in the deck, no question about it. With all that said, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on Beluna Grandsquall. I do feel like this is going to be a pretty fun commander to play in your own adventure decks. I know we do also have the other adventure commander, but I feel like this just kind of tops it out just by a little bit, mainly because you have that adventure side, and also reducing the spells of your permanents that are in adventure are pretty good overall. Plus, not gonna lie, I do like giants a lot in Magic the Gathering and also in other fantasy adventures, so I do feel like this is a pretty good giant tribal themed deck if you wanted to go that route as well. But let me know down below in the comments, do you plan on building Beluna? I feel like it's going to be a pretty fun commander to build around. I do feel like this is going to be my last commander I'm going to be building around in the new Wilds of Eldraine set. If there's any other commanders that I have missed or you feel like deserve to get a deck tech, let me know down below in the comments. I do want to make sure that I do give a good amount of deck techs throughout seasons so that I can kind of give you inspiration to make decks. So again, if there is a commander you want to see a deck tech of, again, let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to do it. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stomping by.